New project just arrived, Shelby GT. So I got the GT500 in here on the hoist. It's actually the first time I've ever had this car up on the hoist. I changed the oil and did a little bit of work to it at the guy's house, but I've never had it off the ground. It's got a very unique suspension in it, but today we're looking at the clutch and we're going to figure out what's going on and why it's not working right. Well, and speaking of that unique suspension, lifted it off the ground and one of the coilovers is dripping oil on the ground. So I'm going to have to tell him about that. The seal looks like it's leaking on this coilover. I'll have to figure out exactly what kind of shocks those are and do something about that. However, the problem we're having today is in here. For some reason, the clutch is not fully disengaging, and when you go to push the clutch in, it won't fully release. So we're gonna have to look inside and see what we can find. So the slave cylinder is coming out and it's going down at an angle. Like this thing got bent and it's not straight anymore. And so instead of pushing directly on the fork, it's pushing kind of up in the air and the fork's going down. I don't understand why. It looks like it's been cut and welded here when it was put on. So I think that's just the angle that it was installed at. And maybe I want to reshim that and see if I can get that to go straight. But that cylinder should push straight against the fork. And it looks like it's at an angle. So I'll definitely have to address that. You can see how the slave cylinder is pointing upward and the rod is pointing downward for the clutch. So it's definitely not centered in the board like it should be. I believe that's probably a big part of our problem with what's going on here. I don't think it's necessarily in the clutch, and it might just be in the slave. I don't know. I can't see where it's freshly bent, but I can definitely see where this bracket was been modified, and maybe they just didn't have it straight to begin with. I'm gonna have to do some measuring and see how much stroke I'm actually getting out of this slave cylinder, but I feel like that definitely should be straight and this should not be crooked. So after doing some research here, I found this bracket where you can purchase it, and it looks like they sell this for the aluminum bell housing. I think this steel bell housing has the position a little bit lower than what it would with the aluminum on here. So I believe that's why this is misaligned. I'm pretty sure what I have to do is shim this cylinder down quite a ways more. It should hopefully be okay to just add some longer bolts and move it down. We are getting pretty far away from the stumps that it actually bolts to. Otherwise, they sell a bracket that bolts off of these bolts, but I'm afraid that because this aftermarket housing is going to be a little different, I don't know that the one that bolts to these bolts is going to fit correctly either. So I think for right now, my best bet, it doesn't cost me anything to just move this bracket and add longer bolts. I don't have to buy any parts to do that, and we'll see if it actually makes the clutch work properly. Okay, so after inspecting the fingers of the clutch plate, or the pressure plate, I wanted to make sure that they all looked even, which I'm pretty sure they do. What I went ahead and did was I changed the adjustment length on the bushings they had for this bracket. I did some research on the bracket. It's definitely for the aluminum bell housing, and that's why we're having problems with this. However, there's a couple other issues. You can see I finally have it pretty centered now. I don't know if I can get the camera up in. Yeah, so you can see the rod is much more centered in the bore and it looks way straighter. However, it's still just a little bit crooked, and part of a hydraulic clutch is that when the plate wears, the fingers get pushed back out away from the flywheel, and the hydraulic system is supposed to take up the slack. But right now, with this adjusted, there's an adjustment nut right here, and I have it turned back as far as it'll go, and this is tight. So as that clutch wears, it would only get tighter and burn the clutch up quicker. So no matter what, this slave cylinder has to be moved rearward. And I think with as long as the bushings ended up getting, which I can show you here, this is what I took out, and I replaced it with something like this. And I left this short one in the rear and I put a tall one in the front, so that way I could get the angle on the cylinder correct. And you can still kind of see even from here, it just looks like the slave cylinder's pointing a little outward and the piston rod's kind of pointing inward. So it's still not perfectly straight. I probably need to cut this bracket here, move it out a little bit, and then re-weld it back together. And I think I'm gonna add an extra strap from this bolt up to the bracket for strength, because we are so far away from the original mounting point. However, I haven't been able to find a bracket that works with this bell housing, which is a clutch pull or a cable pull style housing. And so I think we're just gonna work with what we have and order a new slave cylinder, which I actually found the problem, and it's not even the slave cylinder, it's the master. I'm gonna show you that now. Buried down in this hole here, which it's kind of hard to see, is the clutch slave cylinder or master cylinder behind this wiring here. Right there. So there's a little rusty spot right in the middle there. Right, let me see. Okay, perfect. I'm gonna zoom out a little bit so I'm not so shaky. And okay, right where my screwdriver is down here, that's the clutch master cylinder, and it's up against the power brake booster. And if I zoom in a little bit, you can see a rust spot right there. That's because the two are touching. So with the lack of room for the power brake booster to fit, they installed the clutch master cylinder right next to the booster. And obviously there's some fitment issues there where the booster is actually pushing on the master cylinder and bending it. So I'm gonna take you inside and show you what's going on in there. On the floor here, you can see our clutch here. And what is going on is, first of all, this spring, the return spring, I don't know what they got it doing, but it isn't returning the pedal correctly. It's, when I push on it, it's like the spring is being collapsed together rather than pulling apart. And I think what happened is this spot right here where they hooked the cylinder to is where that spring used to connect to pull the pedal back. And they have it connected up where the cable used to be connected to. I don't know that for sure, but it definitely looks weird to me because the pedal's definitely not returning. However, you can see here the mounting bolts where they have the master stuck to the firewall. The firewall is actually starting to bend a little bit and dent where it's being pushed this direction away from the master cylinder. So when I push the pedal in, we get kind of close to the bottom, you can hear it creaking, and you can actually see it catch that front plate and start to bind up. So our master cylinder isn't working properly. And that's the reason. I think the clutch spring not returning the pedal all the way has held the master cylinder in a position where it just decided to get stuck there and make the clutch not work properly. So we're gonna have to get some different parts and do some modifying and probably oval these holes out and move them over, and then possibly put some reinforcement bracket on the inside here. I don't know, but you can definitely see this one gets down there and binds up. You can hear it creaking. Yeah. So yeah, with the power brake booster pushing the clutch master cylinder this direction, it's sitting at an angle like this. And so kind of the same thing with the slave cylinder not being straight. I'm having the same problem with the master cylinder when they put it together. So some of the fitment of the parts they use just wasn't quite right. I have to try and figure out what they used. Like I said, I did figure out where the bracket came from for the transmission. And it definitely fits a hydraulic conversion kit from a cable, but they are using it on an aluminum bell housing, and they have none of these shims. There's no shims on that bracket when it's connected to the aluminum housing. It bolts directly to it with no spacers. So the fact that this one has the spacing, they were obviously having a problem with that at the beginning and just didn't get it quite right, but they made it work.